most dangerous version of you isn't the one that screams, throws things, or makes a scene. Anger is predictable. It's a release of energy that people can see coming. But there's a version of you that is far more intimidating, the one that goes quiet and stays there. This isn't the silent treatment or some petty game of passive aggression used to get attention. It's the silence of absolute clarity. It's the moment you realize that words are no longer a currency worth spending on certain people. When you hit the Sophia stage, a switch flips deep inside your psyche. You stop reacting to the bait. You stop defending your heart to people who have already committed to misunderstanding you. You finally stop performing softness just to win the approval of people who never intended to give it. This shift is entirely internal. But the moment it happens, the entire energy of the room changes. People who used to feed off your reactions suddenly find themselves starving because you've closed the kitchen. For years, you lived in a state where your empathy was consistently mistaken for fragility. Because you were kind, people assumed you were weak. Because you were understanding, they assumed you were a doormat. They operated under the belief that because you forgave them once, you would forget what they did forever. They thought that because you stayed through the storms, you would stay through the disrespect. You spent a lifetime carrying emotional weight that was never yours to bear, managing other people's tempers, soothing their insecurities, and cleaning up their messes. Back then, you told yourself this was strength. You wore your endurance like a badge of honor, believing that your infinite patience would eventually be rewarded with the love and respect you deserve. But here is the brutal, direct truth. It wasn't strength, it was survival. You learned very early in life that being hyper-attuned to everyone else's needs kept you safe. You became an expert at reading the room because you had to. You learned to anticipate moods and neutralize explosions before they happened just to keep the peace. That hyper-awareness eventually sharpened into a level of empathy so deep, you could read a person's soul within seconds of meeting them. But without boundaries, that gift didn't empower you. It drained you. You were using your superpower to protect people who were actively hurting you. The Sophia stage is the exact moment that awareness stops serving your fear and starts serving your wisdom. You stop using your intuition to fix others and start using it to protect yourself. You begin to see patterns with terrifying precision, not just the patterns of the manipulators around you, but the patterns of how you betrayed yourself just to stay connected. You see the over-explaining for what it was, a plea for validation. You see the over-giving for what it was, a bribe for stability. This is the transition from being a victim of your own kindness to being the strategist of your own life. You are no longer reacting to the world. You are observing it from a place of power. And that quiet, calculated distance is exactly what makes you untouchable. Eventually, you hit a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how many hours you slept. It is an irreversible tired, a profound bone-deep fatigue where your nervous system simply quits. It's the moment your body and mind decide they will no longer participate in the chaos, the drama, or the endless cycles of dysfunction. You reach a point where the cost of engaging is simply too high. You stop arguing because you realize the other person isn't listening anyway. You stop pleading for basic respect because you finally see that respect shouldn't have to be requested. You stop trying to convince people of your worth because you're too busy finally seeing it for yourself. In this stage, you don't explode, you detach. You don't go out with a bang. You leave with a whisper. You simply stop showing up to the fight. And that quiet withdrawal is the loudest thing you've ever done. This is the exact moment when the people around you start to feel the shift, and it terrifies them. Your responses become shorter and more direct. Your energy, which used to be an open buffet for everyone to feast on, pulls back behind a high wall. You begin to observe far more than you speak, watching the world with the eyes of a scientist rather than a participant. Suddenly, the very empathy that once made you so predictable and easy to manage makes you completely unreadable. People get frustrated because they can no longer trigger a reaction out of you. They call you cold, but you aren't cold, you're disciplined. You've decided that your peace is more important than their drama. You no longer rush to repair every crack in a relationship or smooth over every tension. You let the silence stretch. You let the discomfort sit in the air like heavy smoke, and you let people reveal their true character without you there to provide an excuse for them. Through this silence, you arrive at a stinging realization. You were never too sensitive. That was a lie you were told so that people could mishandle you without consequence. The truth is that you were simply too accessible. There is a massive, life-altering difference between being a deep feeler and being a revolving door. You spent years believing your emotional intensity was a flaw or a burden. So, you tried to shrink yourself, mute your colors, and act unbothered just to fit into spaces that were too small for you. But your sensitivity was never the weakness. It was your superpower, your internal compass, and your greatest asset. Your only real mistake was a total lack of boundaries. You gave all access passes to your soul to people who didn't even give you the basic courtesy of a thank you. You have to face the brutal reality that you gave unlimited access to people who offered you the bare minimum in return. You weren't blind to what was happening. You were just relentlessly hopeful. You saw the red flags clearly, the lies, the inconsistency, the subtle digs, but you chose to pick up a paintbrush and repaint them green because you wanted to believe in the potential of the person standing in front of you. You told yourself that if you just explained your pain better, or if you were just a little more patient, they would finally get it. But they didn't stay because they valued who you were. They stayed because you were a shock absorber. They stayed because you absorbed the damage they caused, cleaned up the mess they made, and took the blame for things you didn't do. The Sophia Stage is when you stop being a landing pad for other people's failures and start being a fortress for your own peace. The Sophia Stage strips away the ancient, paralyzing fear of being alone because it replaces it with a much more logical fear. The fear of losing yourself to someone else's disrespect. You finally reach a point of clarity where you realize that sitting in a quiet room by yourself is infinitely lighter than sitting at a dinner table where you are being ignored, devalued, or mocked. Loneliness is just a temporary state of being, but being disrespected is a slow poison that kills your spirit. Once you accept this, you stop the exhausting performance of arguing about your value. You realize that if you have to explain why you deserve basic human decency, you've already lost. Instead of debating, you start enforcing. You stop asking for permission to have boundaries, and you simply start living them. This shift is quiet, but it is absolute. Of course, this newfound self-respect is going to make people incredibly uncomfortable. When you stop being the one who always bends, always reaches out first, and always fixes the problems you didn't cause, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will panic. When you stop overextending yourself to make their lives easier, they will call you distant. When you stop overgiving your time, money, and emotional labor, they will call you selfish. You have to be prepared for that. And more importantly, you have to let them. Their name calling is just a desperate attempt to manipulate you back into your old, easy self. Anyone who only enjoyed your company when you were a doormat will naturally resent you the moment you become selective. You must realize that their resentment is not your burden to carry. It is simply the sound of a predator losing its grip. Your only responsibility now is staying aligned with your own intuition and your own standards. This leads you to a brutal truth. Predictability kills respect. When your forgiveness is a guarantee, your value is automatically discounted in the eyes of others. If people know that no matter how they treat you, you will eventually come around, apologize, and stay, they have zero incentive to change. You become a sure thing, and in the world of human dynamics, a sure thing is rarely respected. It's just used. Sophia teaches you that access to your inner world is a high-level privilege that must be earned every single day, not a default setting that stays on forever. You start to see that many of the people you thought loved you don't actually miss you when you pull away. They miss your availability. They miss having someone to dump their stress on, someone to call for favors, and someone to blame. They don't miss your heart. They miss your compliance. The moment you stop overfunctioning, the moment you stop doing the work of two people in a one-person relationship, the truth of the dynamic finally exposes itself. It's like draining a lake to see the wreckage at the bottom. If a friendship or a romance collapses the second you stop carrying the emotional weight, you have to be brave enough to let it fall. If it only worked because you were doing all the heavy lifting, it was never a connection. It was a burden you were carrying alone. You have to stop romanticizing inconsistent as something mysterious or complicated. Inconsistency is just a lack of interest or a lack of character. Stop chasing clarity from people who thrive on confusion. If they wanted you to understand, they would be clear. If they wanted to be there, they would be. In the Sophia stage, you stop being a detective trying to solve the mystery of why someone treats you poorly, and you become a judge who simply looks at the evidence and closes the case. True power isn't found in how loudly you can shout or how quickly you can clap back. The ultimate power is absolute self-control. Before you reach this stage, your nervous system was essentially running your entire life. You were a prisoner to the environment around you. A slight change in someone's tone, a short text message, or a 3-hour delay in a reply could send you into a tailspin of overthinking and anxiety. You lived in a state of constant reaction, jumping to fix things, explain things, or defend yourself the moment you felt a shift in the energy. But now that cycle is broken. Now when the world tries to trigger you, you simply pause. You've learned the art of creating space between a feeling and a reaction. In that space, you separate trauma from truth. You ask yourself, is this actually happening right now, or is this just an old wound screaming? You no longer react just to relieve the pressure of your own anxiety. You've realized that your peace is too expensive to trade for the temporary relief of a rebuttal. Because you are no longer in a rush to defend yourself, you start to use silence as a tool of observation. You let people talk longer than you used to. You don't jump in to correct their lies or fill the awkward silences they create. When you stop interrupting people's patterns, you allow them to fully expose themselves. You watch as their inconsistencies pile up and their stories stop making sense. You realize that you don't have to catch them in a lie when their own behavior is doing the work for you. This is the realization that not every emotion you feel deserves an audience. You were once taught that being authentic meant expressing every hurt and every thought the moment they occurred. Snorts, but Sophia teaches you that impulsive expression is just another form of self-betrayal. You process your feelings internally. You regulate your own heartbeat, and only then do you decide if a response is even worth your energy. Often, you find that the most devastating high-level response you can give is absolutely nothing at all. This leads you to the final, most important shift, the transition to selective access. It is a common mistake for people to think the Sophia stage is about becoming cold, robotic, or heartless. It's actually the opposite. You still feel everything, the love, the pain, the empathy, but you are now perfectly calibrated. You are a high-value asset that is no longer available to everyone with a pulse. You have finally developed the self-respect to refuse to bleed for people who wouldn't even be willing to bruise for you. The central question of your life has shifted fundamentally. You've stopped waking up and asking, how do I keep this person in my life? Or how do I make them love me? Instead, you look at the reality of their actions and ask, does this person actually deserve access to me? This one question acts as a massive filter, instantly clearing the clutter out of your social and romantic circles. The most powerful part of this transformation is that it happens in total silence. You don't need to post a quote about your new era or send a long paragraph to your ex explaining how much you've grown. You don't warn people that your boundaries are changing. You just move differently. You respond slower. You say less. You stop being the person who checks in on people who never check on you. When you move in silence, you don't give the people around you a chance to argue with your growth or talk you out of your self-respect. You have to accept the hard truth that if you keep going back to the same toxic dynamics after you've seen the truth, it's no longer their manipulation. It's your permission. You are the gatekeeper of your own life. By becoming selective about who gets to sit at your table, you aren't being mean. You are being a steward of your own soul. You've mastered the world's empathy. Now you are mastering your own peace. This is the final frontier of your transformation. The transition from being a master of others to becoming the undisputed master of yourself. For the majority of your life, you have been a PhD student in the emotions of everyone else. You mastered the art of empathy, becoming so skilled at understanding people's pain, their childhood traumas, and their hidden motives that you could find an excuse for almost any behavior. You spent years being the loyal one, the one who stayed when things got ugly, the one who fought for the relationship when the other person had already checked out. And then, the one who prioritized us over me every single time. You proved your loyalty over and over again, but the person you forgot to be loyal to was yourself. Now that era of self-sacrifice is officially over. It is time to take all that energy used to study other people and turn it inward. It is time to stop proving how much you can endure and start proving how much you respect your own soul. You have to accept a truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. Real growth will cost you people, and that is exactly the point. As you evolve into this higher version of yourself, you will become a mismatch for the people who are comfortable with your old boundaryless self. You are no longer willing to be loyal to history over alignment. Just because you have known someone for 10 years doesn't give them a lifetime license to disrespect the person you are today. You are moving away from the idea that time spent equals value earned. If a connection no longer aligns with your peace, your standards, or your future, you must be willing to let it go without an explanation or an apology. If your sudden silence shakes the room or makes people feel uneasy, let it. That discomfort they feel is simply the weight of your presence finally having a backbone. You aren't responsible for soothing their reaction to your self-respect. Your primary job on this planet is not to be liked, understood, or validated by every person you meet. You are not a social project or a public utility designed for everyone's convenience. Your job, your only real job, is to become completely unavailable for disrespect. This means you stop negotiating with people who don't value you. You stop giving one more chance to people who have already shown you who they are. You become a person who is so anchored in their own worth that disrespect doesn't even make you angry anymore. It just makes you disinterested. When someone crosses a line, you don't need to deliver a speech about why it hurt. You simply remove your presence. You are finally closing the door on the version of you that was a fixer, a pleaser, and a peacekeeper at the expense of your own mental health. This is the moment you stop betraying yourself for the sake of keeping a connection alive. Every time you stayed silent when you should have spoken, every time you said yes when your soul was screaming no, and every time you lowered your standards to make someone else feel comfortable, you were committing an act of self-betrayal. The Sophia Stage is the end of that internal war. You are finally choosing to be your own greatest advocate. You are stepping into a life where your kindness is a choice, not a compulsion, and where your love is a prize, not a participation trophy. You have mastered the art of being there for others. Now